Hey everybody, Coach Kyle here. So we're going to continue our discussion, our conversation about anxiety today. So in the last video, we talked about one of the primary drivers of anxiety being avoidance. When we avoid the things that trigger anxiety that our brain is fearful of, we intensify that process the next time that trigger comes up um, by kind of training our brain that, yeah, this thing is dangerous. We need to stay away from it. So, what's the antidote to this? How do we reverse this process? How do we prevent this process of escalation of anxiety over time? Well, it's quite simply doing the opposite of avoidance and facing our fears, um, having a willingness to expose ourselves to those things that cause us anxiety, and having a willingness to kind of develop this sense of curiosity around it. Okay, so I think one of the most helpful ways I teach people this with anxiety is just to train ourselves to have the willingness to sit with the sensations of anxiety. And a lot of times, even when you ask someone, what does anxiety feel like? We don't even know because we're so accustomed to just running from anxiety whenever it comes up that we're not even fully aware of what is even going on in our body and in our brain when that happens. So just getting curious about when I feel anxious, what does that mean? What is going on? What sensations am I feeling in my body? Where are those sensations? Would I describe it? Is it, do I feel it in my chest, in my throat, in my head, in my arms and legs, in my gut? Where is it? What is it? Um, and there's some interesting neuroscience happening there too, just by being curious about it in that way, trying to figure out what's going on. I mean, we're we're no longer processing it so much in our emotional processing centers. We've kind of moved it more into the frontal lobe in our conscious mind, our analytical mind. And just by doing that, we're kind of de-escalating the whole anxiety cycle because we're not feeding back into it danger, danger, danger. We're feeding into it curiosity. I'm not sure what's going on here. What's this all about? And just by doing that, we're training our brain that, okay, this isn't as dangerous because I'm willing to sit here with it and investigate it. So this can be a really powerful tool to start to de-escalate that whole process of anxiety just by having that willingness to be curious, to sit with it, to be present with it. And very often, what people find is once they get over that initial kind of instinctual reaction of, I need to get away from this, what they find is things quite quickly can start to subside, start to reduce in severity just by sitting with it for even, less than a minute. Um, and what we're doing is the opposite of avoidance. We're not avoiding it. We're facing it head on and we're getting curious about it, trying to figure it out. Um, and of course, this applies to whatever situation or circumstance or behavior, activity that's causing the anxiety, if we're aware of even what that is, um, and doing more of that thing. So if I have a lot of anxiety around social events, social gatherings, social situations, I need to be going to more social things, right? And over time, my brain's going to learn that each time I go to a social event and nothing tragic happens, wow, this isn't as dangerous as we initially thought. We can tone down the anxiety around this. There's no need for that. Now, this process, I'm not going to paint a picture like this is super easy, this is super simple, or even that it happens very quickly, because that's not true. That's totally not true. This is hard. This is not easy. And this takes time, right? Learning anything takes time. Learning any new skill takes time and takes practice and effort. This is no different because literally what you're doing is you're creating new neural pathways in your brain, weakening old ones and strengthening these new ones. And that takes time and effort. I don't care what it is, what it's about, it takes time. So we often kind of frame this as like a slow and steady, gradual process, right? You're not, if you're anxious around social events, you're not going to go straight to the biggest social event you can think of, like go to a concert, an arena full of thousands of people. That's starting too big, probably. And what can happen if you try to just force yourself to do these things is, you're going to cause a panic attack or some other very high level, extreme level of anxiety, and you're going to have an extremely negative experience. And this is going to train your brain in the opposite direction. It's really going to reinforce to your brain, wow, that's super dangerous. And we need to cause more anxiety around anything remotely resembling that. Um, so, any reaction of anxiety we get from an exposure to something that causes anxiety, we want to be able to keep it to ideally a mild to moderate level, right? Not over the top. We're not forcing ourselves to sit with our worst fear we can think of. Not yet. Um, Start small. If many different things cause anxiety for you, start with the things that don't cause an intense amount of anxiety. Start small and work your way up. Get some practice under your belt. Get some experience with this process before you jump into those bigger things. And this is again like learning anything else. If you want to become a runner, you don't go out on day one and run a marathon. You got to work up to that. That's just how it works. This is no different. Um, but ideally, you want some kind of anxiety reaction result as a response. And that just means you're crossing the boundary of what your brain's comfortable with. And that's where you want to be. And as you continue to do that, that comfort zone of your brain is going to grow and grow and expand over time. Um, there is a lot of trial and error with this, though. Sometimes we undershoot it and don't get a reaction at all, which is, not a bad thing. And sometimes we completely overshoot it and we go too far. And that's okay too. We can recover from that. It's not a huge setback. Um, and in many ways, that's a win in and of itself, in that you had the courage to go too far. I mean, that's an amazing achievement all in and of itself. So slow and steady, constant progress over time. And this is also for most people, I think there's an element of momentum here. Like things start off pretty slow, pretty small, seemingly insignificant changes at times. Um, but you'll find as you start to work with it more and more, those changes and the rapidity in which they're happening starts to accelerate. Um, where you're making big changes suddenly, and you start to get in that groove, and it's like, wow, things are really moving along now. Also, this process can be messy. One day you might get this level of anxiety, and the next day you might, way overdo it with the same activity, the same amount of effort. And that's just a reflection of, that so many things affect anxiety beyond just what, we're focused in on. Even at something like if we're a little more stressed because of something totally unrelated, it can elevate our anxiety response. So it can feel a little chaotic at times too, but that's normal. That's okay. Just, keep working with it, keep focusing on making those little improvements as you can. Um, and again, this anybody can do this. This is the amazing thing about our brains, is that it's always capable of learning in any direction. So we find ourselves in a tough place, we can learn our ways out of it. Absolutely. Anybody can do this. Um, and it's entirely possible. And two, I want to mention, like, if you have really severe anxiety and even getting close to some of these things is feels like it's way too much, it's overwhelming. Step one for you might be something called imaginary exposure, where we can use our imagination, we can use visualization to visualize exposure to whatever's causing us anxiety. We're not actually doing it, we're just doing it in our minds. And you might find that this actually causes anxiety as well. And but probably to a lesser degree, and it may be a lesser degree that you can work with. So maybe just visualizing these improvements is step one for you, and that's totally okay. And a lot of people have to start there with more severe anxiety, and there's nothing wrong with that. You can make good progress. You can make huge improvements by starting with imaginary exposure just as well. So, um, future videos, we're going to continue talking about anxiety. We'll get into some of the more um, less common, but there are other ways in which anxiety can happen, other things that fuel anxiety that might require a somewhat. I think this approach works for any kind of anxiety, but there may be other circumstances we have to take into account. So we'll talk about some of that stuff in future videos. So stay tuned. We'll see you next time. Take care. Bye bye.